Wow, my cake is so beautiful.
Happy birthday, Simi!
Look at this small girl. Everybody, look at her very well. Look at her nose. Look at her complexion. Does she look like any Ade Cole you have ever seen? Does she, Femi? Answer your mother.
Mommy, please. Not here. Not today. It is Simi's birthday. The whole of Lagos is in this parlor.
Then let the whole of Lagos hear. Let them all hear the kind of woman you brought into this family. 9 years, Femi. 9 good years. And not one of these 2 children carries our family's face. Is she even yours? Are you sure? Or is she the child of one of the drivers or one of the houseboys your wife entertained while you were working day and night?
Mommy, I beg you in the name of God, please.
Do not beg me. You have enjoyed this family's name for 9 years. You have spent our money. You wear our gold. You fly first class. And all this time you have been passing another man's children as Ade Cole heirs. I want a DNA test. Every child. And Femi himself against his late father's bloodline. I want the whole world to know who truly carries Ade Cole blood. I swear on my late husband's grave, I will never allow strange blood to inherit his estate while I am still breathing.
Femi, look at me. I am your wife. We have been together for 9 years. Tell me, are you also standing there wondering if our children are yours?
And in that silence, with 300 perfumed guests holding their breath and their phones, with the birthday cake sagging in the heat and the little girl still crying and no one moving to lift her, the whole world of the woman called Bukola quietly came to an end. Pull your chair closer, my friend. Come and sit, because I am going to tell you the true story of the Ade Cole family of Ikoyi. I am going to tell you how a proud woman demanded a DNA test to destroy her son's innocent wife in front of all of Lagos, and how when the results came back, it was not the wife who was carried out of that house in disgrace. It was somebody nobody in that parlor had ever once suspected. In Lagos, you see, the gates are tall and the smiles are wide. But behind the tall gates, the deadliest wars are not fought with fists or with cutlasses. They are fought in whispers, over dinner, in the exact tone of voice a person uses to say, "Welcome." And the sharpest knife in the whole of that city is the one that wears expensive perfume and calls you "my dear" and smiles at you warmly across the table while it is quietly searching for the soft place between your ribs.
Before I take you any deeper inside those gates, I have to ask you something, and I want you to answer me honestly in the comments. Have you ever been treated like a stranger and a criminal by the very family you married into? Judged, whispered about, humiliated? No matter how faithful and how good you are to them. Tell me your story. Let it out. You are among people who understand. Because this tale is about to remind us all of one ancient truth that the proud never learn in time. That the person who shouts the loudest about your secrets is almost always running from a far bigger one of their own.
To understand that terrible birthday party, you must first understand the 2 women standing on either side of that silent man, because they were as sand and salt, though a foolish eye from a distance might mistake the one for the other. Bukola had not been born into money, not 1 naira of it. Her father was a secondary school teacher in Ibadan, an honest, upright man named Mr. Adelinka, who owned 2 good shirts, a bicycle, a shelf of worn books, and a great deal of quiet dignity. Her mother sold provisions from the small kiosk at the front of their compound: matches, sugar, sachet water, tin tomatoes, the small things a small neighborhood needs. They were not poor in the way that shames a family. They were poor in the honest, careful way where every kobo is counted and every child is taught that character is the only inheritance that thieves cannot steal and fire cannot burn. And that, my friend, was the true wealth that Bukola carried out of that small compound in Ibadan. Her father's dignity, sewn into the lining of her spirit where no one could see it, but where it would one day save her life. She was brilliant, brilliant the way a poor man's child learns to be, because books are the one door money cannot lock against you if you will bleed for the key. She read by candlelight when the power went, which was most nights, won a scholarship to the University of Lagos, and left for the great roaring city with one box of clothes and her father's last words in her ears. Never let anybody buy your good name. It is the only thing you own that is actually yours. She met Femi in the university library, not in a nightclub, not at a big man's party, but in a quiet corner, both of them reaching for the same one textbook, both laughing, each insisting the other take it. He was shy and stammered when he was nervous, and he was nervous around her, which she found sweet. He did not flash money the way the other boys did, and it was weeks before she had any idea that the shy, gentle boy walking her to her hostel was the only son of Chief Adewale Ade Cole, holder of an ancient title, owner of half a Lekki waterfront, a man whose telephone call could open any door in Lagos and shut any that displeased him. She had loved Femi for Femi before she ever knew what a Femi was worth. That, my friend, is a rare and precious thing in a city where most love arrives already holding an invoice and where a girl's beauty is spoken of in the same breath as a man's account balance. It should have been the crown jewel of that whole family, a daughter-in-law who could not possibly have married for money because she had not known there was money to marry. Instead, it became her crime. Because to Chief Mrs. Ayobo Ade Cole, Femi's mother, the arrival of Bukola was not a blessing, it was a catastrophe. A teacher's daughter, a kiosk woman's daughter, a nobody from Ibadan with no famous surname, no family connections, no waterfront of her own, and no board seats to fold into the Ade Cole empire. For years, Ayobo had been quietly, carefully grooming her only son to marry into one or two great Lagos families, a marriage that would be a merger, a joining of fortunes, a fortress with two towers instead of one. She had a particular girl already half chosen, Morenike da Silva, of the old da Silva shipping money, a girl as polished and as empty as a display plate. And Ayobo's foolish, lovesick boy had gone to a library and fallen in love with a scholarship student and had married her for nothing but her heart. Ayobo never forgave it, never. She smiled at the wedding. Oh, she smiled. And she wore the finest lace in the cathedral and she posed for every photograph. But from the very first day Bukola set her foot inside that mansion, the older woman set out, patiently and pleasantly, to make the girl understand that she was a thief who climbed in through a window she had no right to and that she would never, ever be allowed to forget it. Hear the proverb my own grandmother used to say. Not every person who feeds you is your friend, and not every smile that meets you at the gate wishes you to reach the parlour alive.
Let me stop the story right here, because I have to ask you the question that is burning in my own chest. We all want to blame the wicked mother-in-law, and yes, she is wicked. But what about Femi, the husband who stood there and said absolutely nothing, while his own mother called his faithful wife a harlot and his own children bastards in front of 300 people? So tell me in the comments, is Femi's silence just as guilty as his mother's cruelty? Type just as guilty or no, he is only weak. Be honest, because that silence of his is about to cost this family everything. And what the test reveals will leave your mouth hanging open.
Let me tell you how the cruelty worked, because it did not look like cruelty from the outside, and that is exactly why it was so deadly. Ayobo never raised her hand, or rarely even her voice. Her weapons were smaller and far sharper. On family dinners, before important guests, she would wait for a lull and say, sweetly, "Bukola, my dear, that is the fish fork, but do not worry, you would not have learnt these things where you come from." And the guests would laugh their small society laugh, and Bukola would set the fork down with a steady hand and a burning face and eat nothing more that night. She never once called Bukola by her name to a visitor. It was always Femi's wife, as though the girl were a handbag her son had unfortunately purchased that had come attached to the marriage and might, one prayed, one day be returned. When Bukola gave birth to her first child, the boy Deji, after a long, hard labor, alone because Femi was at a meeting her mother had arranged, Ayobo swept into the ward the next morning in her gele and her gold, looked into the cot and said, loud enough for the nurses, he is dark. None of us are that dark. We shall see who he takes after. And she left without holding him. That was the very first day the poison of "who does this child resemble" was dropped into the well, and Bukola, her newborn on her chest, understood that the whispering would never stop and that it had never truly been about a child's complexion at all.
For 9 years, she endured it. The christenings where she sat at the far end of her own children's tables, the family Christmas card that forgot her name year after year, and she endured it the way strong, hopeful women too often do. Quietly, backstreet, tears saved for the locked bathroom and the running tap, because she loved her husband and believed that if she was only good enough, for long enough, the old woman's heart would one day soften. She did not yet understand the proverb, "You cannot use kindness to fill a pot that has had a hole cut in the bottom on purpose. You will pour your whole life away and it will always be empty, because it was never a pot at all. It was a trap shaped like one." And her husband, Femi? Femi. Here is the most painful part of the entire story, so hear it well. Femi was not a wicked man. If he had been wicked, it would honestly have been easier for everyone, because a wicked man you can name and fight and leave. Femi was a weak man, and a weak man, my friend, tied to a wicked mother, can do a family every bit as much damage as a villain and break a good woman's heart even more slowly. He loved Bukola truly in his own soft, stammering way, but he had been raised in the enormous cold shadow of his mother. An only son, his father distant and often away, his mother wrapped around him like a vine around a young tree until he no longer knew where his own spine ended and hers began. He had never once learned to plant his feet and say in a man's steady voice, "Enough, mommy. She is my wife. You will respect her." The word simply did not exist in him. So, every time his mother's blade came out, Femi did the coward's thing. He looked at the floor and waited for the moment to pass, and afterward went to Bukola and murmured, "You know how my mother is. Just manage it for peace." And Bukola, God bless her, managed it, not understanding that there is a kind of peace that is only slavery in a quiet dress, the peace of the goat that stops struggling against the rope because struggling only tightens it. Once, only once, in the 7th year, Bukola had packed a bag. She had reached the very end of the long rope, and she stood at the door of the mansion with her son's hand in one hand and her bag in the other. And Femi had fallen on his knees on that same marble floor and wept and begged and sworn that he would change, that he would speak to his mother, that things would be different. And Bukola, because she loved him, and because a child needs a father, and because hope is the last and most stubborn thing to die in a good heart, she unpacked the bag. And Femi did not speak to his mother. Of course he did not, and things were not different. They were only quiet for a while, until the blade came out again. Because a man who will not stand up once will not stand up ever, until something breaks him so completely that he has no choice but to stand. And that day, for Femi, was still coming. Now, why, you are surely asking, after 9 years of these small, patient, poisonous cruelties, did Chief Mrs. Ade Cole suddenly rise up at a 4-year-old birthday party and reach for the biggest and most public weapon in the entire arsenal of the Lagos elite? The DNA test, that nuclear bomb of family warfare, the thing that ends marriages and inheritances and reputations all at once. Why then? Why so loud, so public, so final? Because, my friend, of the estate. It always comes down to the estate. Old Chief Adewale had died 2 years before, quietly in his sleep and left everything to his only son. The title, the Lekki waterfront, the towers, the companies, the whole glittering mountain of it. But the family charter carried a clause from a colder age. The sacred title and the ancestral land must descend only through the true and unbroken Ade Cole bloodline. True-born son to true-born son. Strange blood was not permitted upon the stool of the fathers. And Yabo, a strategist to the marrow, looked at Deji and Simi and did not see two grandchildren. She saw the future custodians of everything she schemed 40 years to protect, and she could not bear the thought of a librarian's children, this strange blood, one day holding the Ade Cole stool. Her plan was cold and clean. Prove or merely loudly, unforgettably suggest that the children were not truly Femi's, and she could cast Bukola out in disgrace, marry her pliable son at last to the polished, empty Morenike da Silva, and produce heirs of the correct pedigree, the whole thing tied with a ribbon. So she chose her stage for maximum destruction. The child's own birthday, 300 witnesses, every camera in Lagos society, and she reached for the bomb and she dropped it. She was so sure, you see, so completely, unshakably, magnificently sure, because a person who has spent 40 long years standing in the doorway of everyone else's bedroom, pointing and judging and clutching their pearls, is always the very last person on this earth to imagine that one day a bright light might swing around and shine without warning straight into their own. Bukola did not fight the test. This is important, so lean in and hear it well. When the shock and the shame of that party had drained away, when the 300 guests had climbed in their fine cars and driven off into the Lagos traffic, already typing the story into every WhatsApp group on the island, Bukola put her weeping children to bed with her own steady hands. And then she came out and she dried her eyes and she looked her trembling, floor-staring husband dead in his face, and she said something that told you the exact nature of the woman he had been so lucky and so foolish to marry. "Fine," she said. Her voice did not shake, not a little, and that stillness frightened Femi more than any screaming would have. "Fine, let us do the test. And do you want to know why I agree, Femi? Not because your mother demands it. I do not owe that woman one single drop of my blood, and after tonight, I do not owe her one single ounce of my patience. I agree to it for one reason and one reason alone, because I know exactly who I am, and I know exactly who these children are, and I am tired. I am so tired, Femi. I am tired of 9 years of forks and whispers and being called Femi's wife like I am a piece of furniture. So let us bring the paper. Let the whole of Lagos read it. Let there be no room left in this world for even one more whisper against me for the rest of my natural life. But hear me now, Femi Ade Cole, and hear me the way you have never listened to anything in your life. On the day that paper comes back and it says the truth that I already know it will say, you and your mother will kneel, both of you, down on this same marble, and you will apologize to me out loud in front of the same 300 people who stood here tonight and watched me be spat upon. And then I, Femi, not you and not your mother, I will decide whether there is anything left in this marriage worth the saving." Even Yabo, hearing of it later, felt a small, cold, unfamiliar draft pass through her heart, the faintest whisper of a thing she had no name for because she had not felt it in 40 years. But her pride rose up at once and swept it away, the way pride always does, right up until the very end. Now, the old woman was not merely proud. She was thorough in the way only the truly arrogant are thorough. A simple private test between Femi and the children would never do for her grand public execution. She wanted a spectacle so airtight that no one in Lagos could ever whisper it was fixed or bought. So she went herself to the clinic, one of the expensive private ones on the island, all cold glass and framed foreign degrees, and gave her instructions personally.
Femi tested against the children, yes, but she also demanded, for completeness and the honor of the family, that Femi be tested against the true Ade Cole paternal line, his late father's surviving younger brother, Uncle Coyote, so the results would first establish the pure, unbroken bloodline as the gold standard, and only then measure the strangers against it and find them wanting. She wanted the whole city to admire the pure river first, before she pointed her ringed finger at the water she claimed was polluted. She did not stop to think, because the arrogant never do, that when you summon a laboratory to examine an entire bloodline under a bright and impartial light, that light does not fall only where you point. It falls on everyone in the room. It falls on the accuser exactly as brightly as on the accused. They took the samples on a Thursday, a swab from each cheek, Femi's, the two children's, and Uncle Coyote's, dropped into little labeled tubes by a bored technician who had no idea he was holding the fate of a dynasty in his gloved hands. The results were promised for the following Wednesday. Those were the longest 6 days that mansion had ever known. Bukola moved through the house in a strange, growing calm, like a woman who has set a great load down at the top of a long hill. Femi could not sleep or eat and jumped at every sound the house made in the night. And Iyabo spent the week in a fever of triumphant planning, quietly telephoning the Da Silvas to hint that her son might soon, tragically, be free again, and rehearsing in her mind the grand reveal, the moment the teacher's daughter would at last be thrown down the marble steps and out of the tall gates where she belonged. Wednesday came, and Iyabo, of course, could not resist turning it into an event, for she could never swallow a victory in private. It had to be served on a tray, to an audience with the good glasses. She gathered them all in the grand parlour, beneath the enormous portrait of her late husband, who gazed down with the calm, heavy eyes of a man who had kept many secrets of his own. Femi, Bukola, Uncle Coyote, 2 sharp-tongued aunts, the family lawyer, and a careful handful of the most talkative society women on the island. Plenty of mouths to carry the story. The sealed envelope came in on a silver tray, like a crown on a cushion, and she smiled the wide, certain, terrible smile of a woman already savoring her victory, and said, "Let us end this shameful chapter today, in the light, so there can never again be any doubt." She instructed the lawyer to break the seal and read the findings aloud, because she wanted the record to stand forever beyond dispute. The lawyer cleared his throat. He unfolded the crisp pages, and he read the first finding. Regarding the 2 minor children, Deji Ade Cole and Similonwa Ade Cole, the probability of paternity by Mr. Femi Ade Cole is 99.99%. The children are, to a scientific certainty, the biological children of Femi Ade Cole. The parlour went absolutely ringingly still. Bukola did not gloat, she did not leap up. She simply closed her eyes and let a single tear slide down her steady face, and she breathed. 9 years of a held breath released at last, all at once, into that cold air-conditioned room. Femi made a small broken sound low in his throat and put his face into his 2 hands, because in that one instant, the entire crushing weight of what he had stood by and allowed to be done to his faithful, innocent wife came down on his head all at the same time, and he could not hold it up. But Iyabo's face did not fall. Not yet, because a woman like that does not surrender to a single fact. Even in that moment, her quick, cold mind was already racing ahead, already reaching for the next weapon, already preparing to declare that laboratories make mistakes, that the samples must have been switched, that the result was a plot, that a second and a third test must be conducted in a clinic of her own choosing. Her mouth was in fact already opening to begin exactly that work of poisoning the well all over again. And that was the precise moment when the lawyer, frowning now, his eyes moving down to the second page, his voice suddenly far less certain and far less settled than before, read aloud the second finding, the finding that Iyabo herself had commanded, the one meant to display the pure and unbroken Ade Cole line in all its certified glory. Regarding the paternal lineage comparison between Mr. Femi Ade Cole and Mr. Kayode Ade Cole, the surviving brother of the late Chief Adewale Ade Cole, the lawyer stopped. He looked up from the page. He looked slowly at Femi. He looked even more slowly at Iyabo. And then he lowered his eyes and he read the rest because it was written there and he had to. The two men share no paternal bloodline whatsoever. It is genetically impossible for Femi Ade Cole to be the son of the late Chief Adewale Ade Cole or of any man of the Ade Cole paternal line.
You could have heard a single pin drop from the high ceiling onto that marble floor. For a long, long moment, nobody in that parlor understood it. The words simply hung in the cold air, too large to fit through the door of anyone's comprehension. And then, one by one, the way a terrible dawn comes up slowly over a sleeping city, they began to understand. You could watch it move across the room, face by face. Femi Ade Cole, the only son, the heir, the holder of the ancient title, the boy who had been raised his entire life as the pure and proper and precious Ade Cole bloodline itself, was not Chief Adewale's son. Not at all, not by one drop. Which meant only one thing in all the world, which could only ever mean the one thing. 40 years before, Chief Mrs. Iyabo Ade Cole, the guardian of the bloodline, the priestess of the pedigree, the woman who had just gathered all of Lagos society to execute her son's wife for the imagined crime of unfaithfulness, had herself lain with another man, and she had passed off that other man's child, Femi, as her husband's own true and legitimate heir. And she had then built her entire towering life, her whole marble fortress of pride and judgment and contempt upon that single, enormous, buried 40-year-old lie. The strange blood that this woman had spent 9 long years muttering was creeping into her husband's sacred family. The strange blood she had summoned the whole of Lagos to expose and to cast out. It was not in Bukola's innocent, dark-skinned, laughing children. It was in her own son. It had already been sitting upon Chief Adewale's stool for 2 full years. It was standing right there in the middle of the parlor at that very moment, its face buried hands, weeping like a child. The finger that Iyabo had held out rigid and righteous for 40 long years, pointing and pointing and pointing at the sins of the entire world, had at last, in a single quiet afternoon, traveled all the way around the great circle of things and come to rest, trembling, aimed directly at the center of her own chest. Now, the great houses of Ikoyi do not fall quietly, and this one did not. Iyabo tried, God knows she tried, to fight even this, screaming that the test was a fabrication, a plot cooked up by the teacher's daughter. But there was no thread left for her to pull, because she had woven every thread with her own 2 hands. She had chosen the clinic, she had demanded the panel, she had insisted on the test against Uncle Kayode. She had gathered the witnesses and served the envelope on a silver tray. She had dug the pit with tremendous care and then stepped grandly, publicly, into the very center of it. Uncle Kayode, a quiet, watchful man who, it turned out, had harbored a small, cold suspicion about his brother's heir for decades without ever once daring to speak it aloud, simply rose to his feet. He looked for a long, level moment at the woman who had lauded her precious pure bloodline over the entire family for 40 years, over him, over everyone. And then he turned and walked out of the parlor without saying a single word. And his silence, my friend, was louder than any accusation that any mouth could ever have made. The society women did precisely what society women have always done. Before their fine cars had cleared the gates, this story was flying across Lagos faster than the traffic on the 3rd mainland bridge. By morning, everyone from Ikoyi to Ikeja knew the shape of it, that the great Chief Mrs. Ade Cole, guardian of the sacred bloodline, the woman who had branded her faithful daughter-in-law a harlot before 300 people, was herself the one colossal adulteress of the family, and her precious certified heir, a secret she had smuggled into the dynasty 40 years before. The reputation she had been willing to burn an innocent woman alive to protect, she had set fire to with her own 2 hands in front of the very witnesses she had invited to enjoy it. And Bukola? Bukola got her apology, not the small mumbled kind that cost a coward nothing.
She held them both to the promise, and Femi Ade Cole, broken wide open at last, emptied of his mother's shadow, at the age of 40 and far too late becoming something like a man, knelt on that same cold marble in front of her wife. And this time he did not look at the ground. He looked up into her eyes, and he wept, and he said aloud, to her, to the family, to God, that she had been faithful and gracious for 9 years, while he had been a silent, floor-staring coward who let his mother spit on the best thing that ever came into his life, and he did not deserve her and knew it. Every word of it was true, and it did not magically repair everything, for the deepest wounds are never healed in one afternoon by one speech. A woman does not unfeel 9 years of being called a stranger in her own home, and Bukola did not pretend she could. But it was a beginning, and an honest one. An honest, kneeling humility is the only ground solid enough to rebuild anything true upon. What she chose to build there, and whether she built at all, she kept from that day entirely in her own 2 hands, where it had always belonged. As for the estate, and the title, and the whole vast glittering tangle of the Ade Cole fortune, that became a long, slow, complicated war for the lawyers and the elders, as such things always do, and it is a story of its own for another fireside. But here is the part that truly mattered, and Bukola understood it clearly even in the middle of the storm. None of it, the money, the towers, the waterfront, none of it was ever really the point. The point was that a faithful woman, dragged face down through the mud of an entire city, had been lifted up and washed clean and vindicated before all of Lagos, by the exact trap that was so carefully dug to bury her. The point was that the truth, no matter how deep and how cleverly and how long a proud person buries it, keeps its own quiet appointment, and it always, always arrives on the day. Iyabo lived out her remaining years in a small quiet flat far from the mansion, her reign over the family finished forever, her power gone like water into sand, her once mighty name reduced to a cautionary story whispered and laughed over at the very parties she was no longer invited to attend. A woman who held everything a human being could want in her 2 hands and had thrown the whole of it into the fire, all at once, trying to burn a person who had never once done her the smallest wrong. And little Deji and little Simi, the strange blood, the small children she had tried to disgrace and cast out at a birthday party, grew up loved and safe and secure, and became, in the fullness of time, the truest and the finest and the most genuinely noble thing that whole troubled and glittering family ever produced. Which is exactly and precisely as it should be. Because children, my friend, do not inherit their real worth from the purity of some proud old man's bloodline, or from the name carved above a gate, or from the number of towers on the island. They inherit it from the faithfulness of the mother who fought for them in silence, with her back straight and her tears hidden, and her good name held high against an entire city that had already made up its mind that she was nothing at all.
So hear the lesson this story leaves in your hands tonight, and carry it with you through every gate in this city. The person who shouts the loudest about somebody else's sin is so very often just running as fast as they can from a far bigger one of their own. Before you ever raise your finger to point at your neighbor's bedroom, go first and sweep your own. And if you are the one being judged tonight, slandered, humiliated, treated like a stranger and a criminal by the very people who should love you, then hold your head up high, keep your 2 hands clean, and wait. Just wait. Because the pit that a proud person digs for an innocent one is almost always dug to exactly the size of their own grave. The truth keeps its appointment. It always, always comes. Now, do 3 things for me before you go. Tap that subscribe button and ring the bell, because the next story is already waiting for you. Leave a comment and tell me, should Bukola have stayed and rebuilt that marriage, or should she have walked away from the whole family for good? And share this story with somebody who is being judged right now by people who have no right under heaven to judge anyone. Until the next one, keep your heart clean
and let the truth fight your battles for you.